Eugenia, con muchos eventos, hay 40 eventos simultáneos.
Hay una asamblea del SEAL también ahora.
Imagínate, exactamente.
Sí, está justo a la hora. Sí.
Ana, yo creo que si él demora más, no hay problema, o sea, arrancamos en la hora y él se suma.
Falta un minutito, esperemos a ver si puede ingresar, así podemos 11 en punto empezar.
Claro.
Vladi, lo de el envío y todo eso para el vivo ya está, ¿tenés que hacer algo?
No, la cuestión técnica ya está. Me dan el ok, les voy a pedir que apaguen cámaras, micrófonos y demás, y que, bueno, les intérpretes, prendan cámaras y ya estaríamos en condiciones nosotros. La única cuestión... No sé quién va a hacer la apertura, calculo que la vas a hacer vos, Giovanna, como moderadora, ¿verdad? Corríjame si me equivoco. Bien, vamos a hacerlo así. Yo voy a hacer un conteo desde 10 a 5 en voz alta. Vos continúa de 5 a 0. Para cuando llegues al 0 vas a estar en vivo. Si no hay ningún tipo de comentario mío es porque está saliendo todo perfecto.
Está muy bien.
La cuestión técnica deberíamos de quedar apagados.
Son las 11, así que Giovanna, cualquier cosa, Flor y yo vamos a estar acá con las cámaras apagadas y los micrófonos apagados y nos escribimos por el chat.
Muy bien.
Bueno, éxitos. Vladi, cuando digas entonces, ya estamos en horario.
Apago cámara, les pido a aquellos que no vayan a estar hablando en este momento que apaguen cámaras. Recuerden tener los micrófonos silenciados, por favor. Y bueno, Giovanna, entonces voy a hacer un conteo regresivo desde 5 hasta 10. Cuando vos continuás de 5 a 0, cuando llegues a 0 vas a estar en vivo, ¿te parece bien?
Bien, bien.
Perfecto. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Hola, muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Giovanna.
Hello, good morning. I am Giovanna Modé from Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's a big joy to moderate this panel that deals with the education for youth and adult people in the context of pandemics in an analytic situation. And I want to thank all the people that accompany us here in the table and in the virtual hall, in the Congress, all the people that follow the streaming, and remember that those that need simultaneous interpretation for Portuguese, English, and Creole, and also in the gesture language. Yeah. So we have a lot of languages in this occasion. It's a strategic effort of the Latin American campaign for the right for education in this fundamental topic that convokes us for the education of youth and adult people, and is the way to build an international conference of Confiteas Heaven. This was possible thanks to the support of BB International and the alliances that I want to highlight in this moment of these three authors of the study that accompany us and will share with us all their findings. We have the pleasure of having with us here these three persons that will show us their research. And then after their presentation, we will have two other colleagues, very special, that are invited to comment briefly. And at the end, we want to have 10 to 15 minutes of interchange, so you can put your comments and reflections and questions in the chat here down in your screen or through the social nets, from where we will collect your interventions. In the study, we will have all the version of these seminars, as well as the Congress, as well as in Merclade's website and the chats of access. Without any further details, I will leave the floor here to the coordinator of CLADE, Nelsie Lizarazo, who will give you some welcome words. Nelsie, the floor is yours. Thank you, Giovanna. Thank you to all of you that have made possible to be here today in this Congress of Educational Experiences with a study, analytical and descriptive study of a high quality developed by a wonderful team of consultants, expert consultants in education for youth and adult people that has gathered the proposal of CLADE of bringing up this study. I am very much thankful to the three of them, Gloria, Maria Eugenia, and Sara, for this excellent work that without any doubt will be very useful for all the organizations, national as well as regional and global organizations that we are committed with EPJA since all our history, and particularly with the platform of organizations and nets of the civil society for EPJA that we have configured some months ago in our Latin American and Caribbean region. So I want to start recognizing you and thanking the professional work you have done as a team, and you will know them in a few minutes. So I want to welcome everybody who is following us in this road where we are transmitting all these Congress and events. I don't know if you know, it happens to you, but for me it's incredible to not to know exactly with whom I am. It's a mystery. Who are in the virtual halls, in the nets, in the streamings? Who are there? I would love to be with you and see your faces, but without any doubt, all of you are committed with this that we call the education for young and adult people, and that we are fighting in our agendas for the human right for education since so many years. Achieving without any doubt some advancements, important advancement, obtaining some public policies that recognize this ambit so important of education. But also I think with the feeling that everything is a bit slow, too much slow, a lot of work. We have to insist so much and show so much and demonstrate a lot in order that EPJA has the position and visibility that merit in our systems of education, public, especially getting all the experience that the organizations of the civil society in our continent developed since decades in our region, and really invest and make an effort as it merits, as a young and adult people merit from people from our continent. Briefly, I want to comment, 2 minutes, Giovanna, please. Something that happened to me this week. And that is a sign that we are giving some steps. We are giving some steps and not little ones. All this week in Ecuador, we have a National Congress for the Education of Young and Adult People for CONFINTEA, an alliance among the Ministry of Education and the NET that is working in this issue. And in the panel in which I had to take the floor on Monday was called Education for Young and Adult People, their central contributions for the Agenda 2030 in the context and flexibility and intersectoriality. When I read the name of the panel, I said, something we are achieving. Because the recognition of the contribution of EPJA in the Agenda 2030 and characterization, as I read it before, these characteristics of EPJA sound to me an important achievement of recognizing several of the proposals that we are pushing since so many years from EPJA. So I thought, okay, the steps are being given. Maybe we're not going at the rate that we need, but we are giving the steps. This document is another contribution from CLADE with this team of professionals that you will know for all the world of education, young and adult people, and for the people of the fight for the human right for education. And we hope that it will be very much used and a tool of incidence going to CONFINTEA and after CONFINTEA. Welcome, everybody.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Nercy.
Thank you, Nelsie. So I will present the report and I will invite the authors. I present the three of them before, so I will not interrupt them during their presentation. The three of them are specialists of EPJA. So here are Gloria Hernandez, researcher from the Institute from Mexico of Sciences of Education of Mexico. Also Maria Eugenia Letelier from Metropolitan University of Science of Education from Santiago de Chile. And Sara Elena Ortega, a researcher from EPJA. So I think we start with Sara, and among the three of them, they will take the time and the floor. So Sara, please go on. Thank you, Theo, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I will start not to use so much our time. I will share a presentation, very brief presentation, and I hope that you can see it. Everybody can see it. And here we are. As you already know, we will go in a very general way, sharing the results and findings and the process of building that we have developed for this study called The Situation of Education of Young and Adult People in Latin America and the Caribbean in the context of pandemic. So descriptive analytic panorama, as you can see, and here we are, the three of us. As a group of work, And we have
junto con la
share a process in a collaborative way, very interesting, with a lot of dialogue, permanent contributions within the field of EPJA, as I will tell you, and my other colleagues will tell you. This study was it's a CLARE initiative, a contribution for Latin America and the Caribbean to the process of CONFINTEA 7, and an important thing is, from our perspective, is from the right to education. We made it from July and September of this year, so it's very fresh and ready to be shared with you and enrich with your opinions and contributions. Before starting, very fastly, I want to tell you why we have this picture, why we choose this picture in order to share the study. In this picture, we believe that shows very clearly some of the processes that were done during the pandemic times by EPJA, in many cases with new forms of establishing the link, the pedagogical link, to approach it and giving continuity and having educational continuity. So here we see a woman that belongs to an original indigenous people in Oaxaca, in Mexico. And this picture was taken by her collaborator, even if she is not precisely a young woman. It's a woman that is using already the cellular phone. As many of you already know, was a resource of a big help and presence during the process, educational processes within pandemia. So it was a very expressive picture in relation with these processes that are being developed in the framework of education for young and adult people in this moment of pandemic. And we want to share with you that our study is integrated by 4 big chapters. There is a summary, an executive summary, some preliminary words, and we have 4 chapters. The first one is a referential framework of the document that offers a general vision of from where we start and which are the positioning regarding the education of young and adult people, which are the contexts that we are considering, that show which are the practices, the situations, the perspectives in a very synthetic way. And my companion Gloria will tell you which was the methodological process for doing this study, but then we have an analysis of the documental information that we obtain from different sources, and then a chapter of the analysis of information that comes from actors from the education with young and adult people in Latin America and the Caribbean, and then in the documental analysis and the information that we took from the actors, we went to certain categories that were developed in the process, which is what you can see here from the institution, the subject, the conditions of use of the technology, the pedagogical dimension, financing and resources. And finally, we have a final chapter regarding the conclusions, recommendations, and strategic plan, which are more detailed. Well, this is, I want to thank Claude and all the instances and the people that contributed with us to achieve this study. And if we have a little time, Within the presentations, we will pass the names of the people that accompany us and supported us in the realization of all this work. Thank you so much, and I leave the word to my friends.
Pues de nuevo, muy buenos días
para nosotros. Good morning for us. We work in a team, and I want to start saying that it's a big joy to be here with the opportunity that Clare gives us to get together and do something in a collective way. Aside from the hope and joy that we are having, it's a commitment with the ones that make this study. The elaboration of this text in pandemia was our first challenge. To think the moment in which we're living was complex, was to build in the heart of the civilization crisis that we are living. We are in a moment of imprevisibility of the human being, of our fragility, and it questions strongly the models of development. As we all know, the exacerbation of inequalities of our region. At the same time, this commitment that we have put us in a big diversity of registers, the intellectual one, the affective one, with our political and ethical commitment with EPJA in order to comprehend and identify recommendations in the present context, considering the process of Latin America and all the contribution and richness, as well as the own Confinteas. We assume this commitment to do this study and make explicit, as many studies do. It's a pity that not always is done. We explicit in our study and the building construction, our perspective, theoretical, political, that we assume in order to develop this study. We do not understand the perspective just a theoretical framework, but as a position, ethical, political, epistemological, from where one describes and analyzes reality. So we put ourselves in a focus on the rights that have to do with the recognition of the subjects of right, but also it has to do with a subject that is not only the one that gets, but also builds its right to education. So we put EPJA as a field, a strong field that relates and opens to other rights, being transversal to all the objectives of a sustainable development. This position allows us to look to EPJA as a right that habilitates and is transversal, but gathers the different perspectives, the Freirean ones that we took for our study, but also make us look to the social justice and educational justice that recognizes the production of knowledge of daily life. We name them as vital knowledges that have importance in the transformation of EPJA. So this focus allows us to go through a methodology that included sources that we call primary and secondary. I will start by the second ones. Briefly, these sources call us to do an enormous systematization of a big amount of text in order to have a framework as a reference that will allow us to write about the initiative of the states through the ministers of education and other alliances in an ample international scope. But also this framework allows us, that you will find in the study, to project EPJA throughout the context and the commitments of the states that have to accomplish, and the ones that we know that there are some pending debts. So in this sense, it was an important reference to describe and analyze this. So the text that you will read, and we hope you will contribute with initiatives and questions, not only inscribe EPJA, but give it power, because in the present context, it has an emancipatory and liberating possibilities for the future. The education, the popular education in Latin America can be set in the agenda of the seventh Conference of Education with Young and Adult People. So we find an element that we want to share in this methodological process, a lack of information systems that are valid and transparent of EPJA, that not only impacts, as we know, in the decision makers, but also in the generation of knowledge. The absence in international systems and national ones is not admissible, because it tells about the marginality of the field and makes it difficult, as it was for us, the generation of knowledge. Although we go further with secondary sources that were systematized in different schedules for different countries, thanks to the definition of 5 axes that we defined through previous analysis: institutionality, conditions of use of technologies, the subject of the pandemic, the pedagogical dimension, and the financing. In this way, we advance with different schedules for each country that were sources for the description, the analytical description, but also we decided to build and design sources, primary sources, through different talks. This was very important, these conversations, because they were thought as dialogue spaces with specialists and people that works in the ministries and educators that were able to recover the experience that they lived from the state responses that we live, that depend from the previous conditions. How does the pandemic takes us, and also the communities and the social movements that were able to make these conversations alive and recognize the experiences, that not only them, but also the possibilities for the future were in the communities as a clue element, but also in the people themselves. These elements, through the conversations we find, that can define the road that we can take as findings, conclusions, recommendations. That's why in this methodology, as my friend tells about, we want to thank all of you for this incredible support and the voices that came out in these conversations. I want to share with you an enormous diversity from the place, but also intergenerational, because we had young people, young teachers that share with us all their experiences and problems and also their hopes. So we build a methodology that brings us to a strong systematization of these voices and has a character which is fundamental, and you will see in the study. It's an analysis and a description as contextualized. This context then brings us to look to recognize that organic crisis, civilizatory crisis that affects all human beings, but also the life in the planet, with the recognition. And in this context that was part of the methodology, we question the models of development, but also we question, we see the role of the social movements in favor of life and just models of development, from the good living, the well-being, whether living with nature, with the spiritual world, but also with the future generation. That is why our focus has as a strong idea the intergenerationality. In this way, we find that even if has shown that our region is trapped among the big inequalities and the little economical development and growth, is one of the most unequal regions of the world, so it demands urgent actions and the recognition that EPJA contributes in this process. In this context, we want to use the place, special place for the woman. Women have their experience in confinement and poverty, and within the pandemics, the poverty in households and violence, and they are in the first row of attention. And to all of them who suffer and had problems of health in this pandemic situation. Within EPJA, we know that the displacement of education to the households through digital and the education and the digital education, with the risk of exclusion, not only imply the lack of access, but also the lack of conditions for the development. So in this context, we look at these elements that add to the loss, maybe for the moment, of territories of educational interaction, to the link, pedagogical link that is built, and the limit situation that needs to be described as it was described by Paulo Freire. This link, pedagogical link, is transformed thanks to the possibility of being together in a presential way of the pandemics, but the communitary codes and the educational subjects were central in this context. In this way, the way of building this text considered theoretical perspective, context, experiences that we live, expectations, hopes, critics, problems. All of that constitute the logic of building, basically from the dialogue and the problematization, and also putting with love, as Freire described it, the generation of knowledge. And we hope that with you, this logic of construction will not be a rigid methodology, but an encounter with science and with all of them who participated in order to build another narrative of education with the young and adult people. Thank you so much. I want to thank the possibility of being here in this space of interchange, presenting a work that has had as a center the dialogue, the interchange, learning in a collaborative way that has allowed us, Gloria said, to make a co-construction. We want that this product can be shared in order to write it down with all of you, in order to deepen in a theme so difficult, so far away and significant and important as it is the education for young and adult people. And it's difficult because among the findings that we found, as Gloria said, in 5 ambits that get together, we see the conditions of institutionality, the use of technology, the recognitions of the subject of pandemic, the pedagogical dimension, the finance, and the resources. We see that there is a difficult road in the education for young and adult people, a difficult road, and that has a lot of hope also, because this access that open up from the conversations that we are putting up from the young and adult education show also the possibility to build a new narrative and new form of looking and valuing education for young and adult people.
Voy a referirme brevemente
Briefly, I will show the main findings and conclusions of the study. We said that the institutionality is one dimension, and there we saw that it's important to comprehend, and it's obvious that the situation of pandemics reflects also the previous policies and impacts. And within this institutionality, we see a problem that is the institutional weakness to define long-term policies. During the pandemic, this tendency has been dominant. One can, in the 18 countries that we study as secondary source of information, we saw that in the majority there is an opposition to EPJA, or it is thought as a secondary issue, as a note. So all the effort during the pandemic was referred to the education with child and young people, with an omission, except some cases that are reflected in the text, that in majority of the cases, the reasons of how to sustain these policies from the initial moment of pandemic have to do with the flexible programs. The flexible programs were a better response of the rigid ones with the young and adults education. These responses are not homogeneous. In some countries, they do not use them. We have to say that these countries previously also have not used them, as Brazil was. But also we have to say that in some way there is a response in terms of social mobilization. This we can see clearly in the case of Colombia. There is a response in front of an action of wanting to put aside EPJA. There is a response in the social mobilizations that reconfigure it. So the policies are not only have to do with what happens with the taking of the decisions, but also with the responses, organized responses of the civil society. From that point of view, even if this marginal character of EPJA is clear, one can say also that there is a certain pressure that is not articulated, that is different, that many times are territorial, local, where it sustains the continuity of EPJA. So, knowing that exists this enormous weakness in the institutional field, there are some other actions that have influence in the possibility of continuity of young and adult education, even in pandemic conditions. Another issue has to do with the use of technology. This is something that we can verify in all the educational contexts, that always there has been this inequality, this vulnerability for the right to education, given by the places where one lives according to the discriminations of the educational system. In pandemic, with young and adult educations, in fact, there was a greater gap in the digital field, and that was an obstacle for the continuity of the educational offer, even countries as Uruguay that has a good expansion and coverage for the technology. Even in this case, in young and adult education, there is a gap because there are not enough computers, all the places have different access. So we see that the conditions of the use of technology augments the gap and vulnerates the right to education. And this has to do with another aspect of the third point, which is the EPJA subjects identification. Many times in the households, we saw that in front of the need of connection of the daughters or sons to the educational system, even the young and adults educational subjects prefer to give the option of the use or access of technology to the sons and daughters. So in some way, one discovers how the subjects of EPJA themselves are self-discriminated because there is no capacity of valuing the enormous effort that there is from young and adult people to themselves. So that right, the internalization of their right to be a subject of education is a thing that is a road that we need to open to build as a subject of a right to education. In this identification, we also saw almost all the action during the pandemic or in this cycle, because we thought this is not a pandemic post-pandemia, this is a cycle of the pandemia that comes and goes, has different stages. So what happens in these circumstances is that the enormous effort and importance and the role that the educators had, this was an unanimous theme in all the conversations, the support, the encounter, the solidarity among the teachers, how they gave testimony on their tools that they acquired thanks to this solidarity, and how the teachers, thanks to their cellular phones or whatever, contact the students and make a sort of encounter with emotional tools. How was the health? What can they do? They visited to the houses, they bring some printed material to them. They made multiple strategies, and we should do a special research in order to know all what happened during all those months of pandemic. Sorry, Eugenia, but you have just 1 minute left. Sorry. Thank you. So I want to say just that we have done a lot of effort, pedagogical effort, and I go back to some conclusions. I read you the titles only. Invisibility of young and adult education that was accentuated in pandemia, a reserved place for young and adult education that favored the critical condition. We would like to talk about this, not now, but in another moment. The young and adult education have a role during the ministry and favoring the continuity of the policies that finally EPJA has to absorb in its deficiencies. And it's not seen as an opportunity, but as a place of reserved to not to show the deficiencies of the educational system. The ODS, the policies are not warranting their fulfillment. We want to say that in pandemia, we perceive clearly how the model is exhausted. how it's important to learn intergenerationality and new challenges appear in order to find new significance and value. And there are many learnings that pandemia makes clear, not only as an interchange among young and adult people, but with technology or with parents teaching to their kids, but also pandemia offers the possibility of a different dialogue, transversal, that is held within the household. Thank you so much. We have tried to summarize everything, but I want to say the last point, the lack of research that makes difficult to produce knowledge around EPJA. Thank you so much. I want to say two things that derive from all the conclusions. We will not talk about everything, only 2 points. We are convinced that we need a new narrative for EPJA. This is fundamental. Another point that we cannot avoid is that it is very urgent within pandemia and post-pandemia, the work of professionality of the teachers. And the third one is to highlight the need of Confintea, its organization structure and the forms of participation. And with that, we feel sorry. We know that we are very much enthusiastic with all this content. I want to thank all the team, Sara, Gloria, Maria Eugenia. It's a very richness and a big, great presentation with all these proposals very clearly shown in the document, that we will share it through the chat. Maybe you can see it here in the chat, you can download it. And there are many other conversations and elements in order to reflect and debate. And we will continue after this first presentation. We are sure about. Many people is saying hello. I'm from Brazil, Colombia, Honduras, Paraguay, Chile, from other places, from our Latin America and the Caribbean. And we will continue adding more voices. I want to invite Timothy Ireland, that is the Vice President of ICIA for Latin America, and is member of our platforms of NET for EPJA, and also teacher from the university, and among many other things. He knows very well all these fields. So, Timothy, it's a pleasure to be with you in this conversation. It's yours, the floor, for 10 minutes of comment. Good morning, Giovanna. Good morning, everybody. I will speak in Portuguese, considering that we are in this Latin American environment. I want to congratulate Clave and the authors, the researchers, for the importance of this study, and to thank the privilege of this moment of the presentation of the work. It is a very rich study that is impossible to comment in 10 minutes. So I want to highlight some points that I consider very important, and I will do 2 contributions. Before the comments, I want to make 3 general considerations. First, that this report obliges the comprehension that the means of education, without education we will have a greater problem, because education is part of the solution. Then, after second part, after decades of education, we have some concepts as neoliberal education that does not prepare persons for life, but for work only. And we need to rethink again in a radical way the policies of education. A third place, that sustainability, human sustainability and of the planet is the same, and same thing, the planet and the people. And also, we need to think, according to this study, the context of COP26 that just concluded in Glasgow on Sunday with regarding the future of education and the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development, and how it makes part of the process of mobilization for COP27 in Morocco. And in front of all that, in the context of the major economical and civilizatory crisis that our Earth already is facing. With this comment, I want to make among all the ones that have been made already during the presentation, but I think it's important to reinforce. First, the report points to the invisibility of the governmental policies in the major of the countries of Latin America and the Caribbean. The invisibility is due to the lack of rich pedagogical proposals, and this lack of priorities makes more evident during this period of pandemics. Aside from that, the report also on the absence of many of the reports of international and regional agencies of the impact on EPJA that has reinforced this sense of invisibility. I would say that we feel the lack of historical approach of UNESCO in this moment. Second comment is how it was placed by Maria Eugenia to establish a new narrative for the youth and adult education, a new narrative that has to do with a deficitary and compensatory model. Now we need to nourish from other epistemologies, not from the dominant ones, and this implies a big change of perspective and universal proposals, from universal proposals to pluriversal proposals that show the richness of life in this planet. And a third point of view that Maria Eugenia also referred to is fundamental, is a recognition to the work of the teachers, incredible work of the teachers, that without any support, they offer emotional and pedagogical support and material and financing for the students. In terms of suggestions, I think that given this perspective of education as a fundamental human right, it's urgent to re-see the Declaration of Human Rights presented in 1948 without denying the importance, but that declaration is essentially an anthropocentrical declaration, and recognize also that there are millions of ways of life in this planet that have the right to flourish. The anthropocentric vision is reinforcing a vision that is anthropocentric of the relationship among the humanity and nature with disastrous results that we are living. With the concept itself of sustainability. And I consider also that we need the courage and the capacity of put the preservation of the planet in the first place in order to rethink everything. This needs to orient our processes and practices, educational practices with adults, so that reaching an eco-pedagogical terms. And finally, also, I agree absolutely with the need of reinforcing the recommendation of seeing again the process of Confintea. After 70 years, this process also needs to be rethought, to be restructured, and create a new architecture. And I finish repeating the compliments for Claude and the teachers Gloria Hernandez, Maria Eugenia, Saladena, for this excellent analysis of the situation of EPJA in Latin America, and a document of analysis very important for this moment in order to guarantee that it is not so invisible as it is today after all these years. I thank you so much this moment to make my comments. Thank you. Very important, your comments, fundamental comments. And then, in order to finish, to invite also Carolina Bellar-Casar, specialist of the Unit of Quality of Learning of Life of UNESCO in Santiago, with whom we have had the chance to work in the regional mobilizations and Confitea 7. Thank you so much, Carolina. It's a pleasure to hear you in 10 minutes. You are the floor.
Para comenzar,
okay, thank you. In order to start, I want to thank Claude for this invitation, and in particular to thank the Regional Office for Latin American UNESCO for all the support that we have had in all the process of preparation of the sub-regional consultation for Latin America and the Caribbean, the way to Confintea 7 that had place on July this year with 20 countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, because Cuba and Haiti and Dominican Republic was there. We had another consultation in April with English Caribbean. With a little context to my comment, all this work was done in relation with the 7 Confintea that we have already mentioned, from a perspective of learning throughout life, which is the perspective of this 7th Confintea that will happen on 2022 in Morocco, is to establish the evolution of learning and the education of adults from 2009. How the learning and the education of adults contributes to the achievement of the Agenda 2030 for sustainable development, integrated economical and environmental, and to propose a new framework for the education of adults for the next 12 years. As you know, UNESCO has organized this conference each 12 years, with the last one in 2009, that developed in the framework of Belén, that wants to orient the state members in the bettering of learning of adults in 7 areas: alphabetization, policies, governance, financing, participation, inclusion and equity and quality. I want to also point out one instrument that is very important, approved by UNESCO Conference, General Conference, is the recommendation on learning of adults, 2015, that proposes principles, goals, and orientations for each state member and consider how to better the learning of adults in their own context. This is a framework that helps the countries to have references and monitoring in which state they are in relation with their public policies. What is the goal of adults learning and knowledge? There is to give people capacities which are needed to exercise their rights and make them effective and to be in charge of their own destiny. This recommendation of 2015 defines these spheres fundamental in learning, to treat alphabetization of basic competences, professional ones, and also for the ones for active citizenship. So precisely, I want to focus on one of these spheres, and is the one that has to do with alphabetization of young and adults. To articulate my comments throughout that. Precisely, I thank the study and I congratulate the authors, and seeing the conclusions and the analysis that you have done, the findings and conclusions and recommendations, we see that they coincide with those that are in the different reports that the sub-regional is doing in Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's a point that the authors have mentioned, and it's the lack of data and information, systematized information and research. It is very important regarding EPJA. It's very important that this notice shows that we had EPJA evidences, because there we can have informed policies and better decisions that could be relevant to the context of the different countries. So, returning to alphabetization, what do we know today of alphabetization of young and adults? As I comment, as Timothy comment, UNESCO has came out in 2020 a report on alphabetization of young and adults in pandemic. What do we know about it? We know that the INCHO declaration in the ODS 4 in the Agenda 2030, alphabetization is seen as as forming part of the right to education and constitutes a public asset. Is a indispensable pillar of the independent learning. In its present focus, unfortunately, we see that alphabetism and analphabetism is not considered as a continuity of continuous learning that we should apply in relevance to the social and economical life of the communities and the different people. Because why do I say that? Because this becomes a challenge on how we will measure them, how we will know how we are with alphabetization, how we are in the region in a proactive way. We are using the conception of alphabetization in this polarity. Do you know how to write and read, or you don't? Precisely, the field of action of 2030 defines to go further and defines alphabetization as the capacity of identifying and understanding, interpreting, creating, communicating, and calculating all the use of materials printed in different contexts. Alphabetization represents a continuum of learning that allows the individual to accomplish its goals and participate actively in activities of the community and social activities. In this moment, we have recent data of 2019 and 2020, considering 19 countries of the region. We know that 5% of the population does not know how to write or read a simple phrase. This is the conception that the Institute of Statistics of UNESCO is using in order to have more information. If the person is able to comprehend, to write, and to read a simple phrase, this is 5.5 of the population in Latin America and the Caribbean. 17 points, the population of more of 65 years cannot write or read a phrase, and 20% of the population of 25 or more has not finished the primary education. In order to have the data on alphabetization of young adults, how do we know this? Thanks to some diagnosis, and we ask the people, do you know how to write or read? This is a self-declaration, and we believe the person that says, yes, I am or I am not alphabet. And the person can declare until which year of the primary study, but that does not tell us how the person knows how to read and write, and if it will help us to change their lives. This is a view much more ample of alphabetization. There are other ways to evaluate this, and the person should show the ability thanks to a specific task that could show how it's going from one place of difficulty to another, but that is more expensive. So I want to conclude with these comments and asking the authors of this important and valuable research, how you mentioned it's very difficult to have this data and this information, and I have talked only about one example and one dimension, which is the alphabetization of young adults. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Carolina, for your contribution. We will continue this interchange. Here we have the challenge of the time of our panel, but I want to give back the floor to Sara, Flora, and Maria Eugenia. If you want to have a final comment of 2 minutes with some of the very interesting points that we have seen. And I want to say that we have a lot of questions and comments in our chat in the tone of debate. They're from Colombia. They say that we have a big challenge to ask the states to guarantee the young and adults education, and from Chile also to finish with the gaps that Maria Eugenia signed so clear. So if there is any other comment or question, we are very attentive here in the chat. I will pass the floor to you three. I don't know in which order, Sara, Maria Eugenia, Gloria. Maybe you will give your final remarks.
Bueno, pues yo solamente quiero tomarme un
I want to take just 1 minute
mi querida Sara Elena.
and to give the rest to Sara and Elena. I want to thank a lot. And with this study, we want to advance in the building of a new narrative. I think that we have to be more radicals in the word to state the problems that we have since so many decades and where we are going, saying that in the team in which I belong, and I am honored to belong, we are positioning EPJA, but what do we want to positioning? We have questions and conclusions that are open, and we continue as a team convoking to a dialogue, convoking to this text as a pretext. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to Claude for all the support and all the ones that were present in this study that is of many people. Thank you so much. And in fact, I just, in these closing remarks, Carolina was asking about the information, and Gloria in her moment was saying on how we have documental information through web pages, ministries, social nets, many cases. The lack of systematicity is incredible of data and information. So as I said, some of the conclusions and recommendations and the strategic lines that we propose in levels of the study have to do with this need of generating knowledge and generating information and systems of monitoring that could be valid of all what is happening in the framework of EPJA in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is an initiative that must be considered already. And on the other hand, something that is very important for us is to be able to think in other aspects that emerged during pandemia. One of them have to do with the creation of a digital citizenship. We know that the presentiality in all these aspects related with the face-to-face contact and what is needed to establish important links with results pass through presentiality. But in the pandemic conditions, it's important to build digital citizenship, and it's very important to highlight it. And we need to reinforce the teachers' work, not only in terms of formations, but in terms of support, conditions of work, salaries, laboral conditions. And something that we think is needed to highlight is that we need to be coherent with the needs of EPJA. What we find in the study is that many of these diversities are not visible. So when they are not being visible, they are not attended, and they do not have a presence, a protagonism, being so important part of the right of education. So we think we need to renew the institutions, redefine the nucleus of institutionality in terms of the narrative and of the work of cooperation and international agencies in all this process. We thank a lot to Claude and all the ones that were participants of this study. Thank you a lot. I want just to thank you and say that we are in a moment of life, of humanity, where young and adults education has become a vital contribution. We have to find in this new narrative, how do we place ourselves in the space that human beings have. As Timothy said, we are in a situation in which more than human rights, education is a vital right. It's a possibility that we can get together living in this planet. And there is the big hope. The big hope has to do with education, young and adult education, because there is a history, a culture, a vision of the future. And we can build that hope That hope can be built day to day, and that hope is in the young and adults education, and there we want to find all of us, because all of us, we are needed. So thanks so much. I am very thankful of Claudia for this study, but also because of the possibility of this very rich dialogue with all my companions that have been an inspirational moment. And also I thank Sara Elena and Gloria.
Qué lindo, muchísimas gracias.
Very beautiful. Thank you for sharing all these encounters. You know that this is a conversation that goes on in the next month. It is the first presentation of this important work that we have done last month. We are very happy with this contribution, and we consider a tool for the reflection and analysis and incidents. There is a lot to do. There will be a lot of opportunities on the platform of nets. In the next month, it will be more than invited to participate and continue to following the activities. And from Claudia, it will start in 15 minutes. So we are very much welcome with brief reflections. So we thank you so much for this encounter. We say hello to all of you. Remember that all this is being recorded and is in disposition for the ones that couldn't follow it online. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Gracias. Gracias.
Thank you.